Hey guys, tonight we're taking a very slow trip to a place you might not immediately think of when you picture grand historical structures. Forget the Colosseum, push aside the pyramids, and let your mind gently drift away from the iconic Great Wall of China. Instead, imagine standing, or perhaps you're already lying down, on a vast, flat plain stretching out before you, the air thick with the scent of dry grass and distant dust. It's quiet, save for the whisper of the wind, and in the twilight, you begin to discern a faint, undulating line stretching as far as the eye can see. This isn't just any line. It's a forgotten monument, a silent sentinel of ancient ambition, slowly decaying back into the earth. We're talking about the Great Wall of Gorgan, sometimes known as the Red Snake. And tonight, we're going to trace its long, drawn-out construction, piece by deliberate piece, until you're hopefully dreaming of ancient bricks and weary laborers. You might find that even the simplest historical facts can lull you into a deep slumber when presented with enough gentle detail. You probably wouldn't survive a single day working on this wall, but you can certainly drift off, contemplating it from your comfy bed. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing, or perhaps more accurately, you're hovering gently, high above the northeastern reaches of what was once the mighty Persian Empire, a land steeped in history, grandeur, and surprisingly intricate infrastructure. We're talking about a period long before your modern GPS systems, before satellite maps, even before anything resembling a truly comprehensive cartography system existed. Yet, even back then, strategic locations mattered immensely. And the region of Gorgan, nestled between the Caspian Sea to the west and the formidable Alborz Mountains to the south, was absolutely crucial. Think of it as a natural corridor, a historical highway, if you will, but one that funneled unwelcome guests directly into the heart of the empire. To the north, vast steppes stretched endlessly, home to nomadic tribes whose intentions weren't always, shall we say, neighborly. These weren't just random wanderers. They were often formidable horse-riding warriors, capable of swift and devastating raids. The terrain here is largely flat, which is wonderful for travel, but terrible for defense if you're trying to keep people out. No natural choke points, no mountain passes to easily guard. It's like trying to keep sand out of a sieve. You need something more substantial, something continuous. This flat, inviting landscape, however, also made it an attractive agricultural zone for the sedentary populations who formed the backbone of the Persian state. They cultivated crops, built towns, and developed a society that, frankly, didn't much appreciate unexpected visits from those who preferred to take rather than trade. So, in your mind's eye, see this flat, fertile land, bordered by the shimmering Caspian and the distant, protective peaks, a place of both plenty and peril. A land just begging for a really long wall. Historians still argue whether the primary motivation for such a colossal undertaking was purely defensive, or also served as a means of controlling trade routes and demonstrating imperial power. But either way, the strategic importance of Gorgan was undeniable. It was a bottleneck that needed a stopper, a geographical vulnerability that demanded a monumental solution. As you continue your gentle hover over this ancient landscape, letting the soft, unseen winds of history carry you, Our focus narrows onto the Sassanian Empire. This was not just any empire. It was a colossus, a dominant power in the Near East from the 3rd to the 7th centuries CE, spanning over 4 centuries of continuous rule. Imagine an empire so vast that it stretched from the borders of India to parts of the Arabian Peninsula, encompassing Mesopotamia, Armenia, and much of Central Asia. The Sassanian rulers, known as the King of Kings, saw themselves as the rightful heirs to the Achaemenid Empire, the very first Persian empire, the one that famously tangled with the Greeks. They were mighty, they were organized, and they were, perhaps most importantly for our story tonight, constantly looking to secure their borders. Their main rivals were often the Romans, and later the Byzantines. To the west, a rivalry that played out over centuries in a series of epic, slow-motion conflicts that occasionally flared into intense warfare. But while much of the Sassanid military might was focused on these western frontiers, they couldn't afford to ignore the restless northern boundaries. Think of the Sassanian political landscape like a grand, intricate tapestry. Each thread represented a different challenge or ambition. While the gleaming cities of Ctesiphon or Bishopur might have been the dazzling patterns in the center, the rough, frayed edges of the steppes to the north were a persistent headache. The people dwelling there, often referred to generally as Huns or Turkic tribes, were not a unified political entity. Instead, they were a fluid collection of nomadic groups, some more organized than others, but all possessing a common ability to rapidly mobilize and conduct lightning-fast raids. They were, in essence, the ancient world's version of a pop-up advertisement, constantly appearing where you least expected them and often leaving a mess behind. The Sassanid state, with its highly centralized bureaucracy and professional army, understood the threat posed by these mobile forces. They weren't just a nuisance. Unchecked, these incursions could devastate agricultural lands, disrupt trade, and undermine the stability that the empire so carefully cultivated. So, while emperors like Shapur I or Khosrow I are famed for their military victories against the Romans, the less glamorous, but equally vital, task of securing the northern flank remained a constant strategic imperative. It's a bit like having a leaky faucet when your main concern is a burst pipe in the basement. You deal with the big problem, but the slow, persistent drip in the kitchen still needs addressing. Historians still argue whether specific Sassanid rulers directly ordered the construction of the entire length of the Gorgan Wall, or if it was a more gradual, evolving project built in stages by successive kings reacting to changing threats. What is clear, however, is that the political will and organizational capacity of the Sassanid state were absolutely essential for undertaking such a monumental long-term defensive project. As your gentle aerial perspective continues to drift, you might begin to wonder if the Great Wall of Gorgan simply appeared out of thin air, a spontaneous eruption of brick and mortar. But like most grand historical projects, it had its early fortifications, its humble beginnings, its smaller, more localized attempts at defense that laid the groundwork for what was to become truly colossal. Long before the Sassanians conceived of their red snake, the region of Gorgan, due to its very nature as a gateway, had seen various forms of defensive structures. Imagine, if you will, scattered watchtowers, perhaps simple earthworks, or even palisades made of timber, erected by earlier, less organized communities, or by preceding empires. These were reactive defenses, often thrown up in response to immediate threats, rather than part of a grand, overarching strategic vision. Think of a farmer building a fence to keep out stray animals, rather than an entire government planning a nationwide border control system. Archaeological evidence, often unearthed in painstaking, dusty digs that would bore even the most dedicated history enthusiast, suggests that even the Achaemenids, that first great Persian empire we briefly mentioned, might have had some presence here. They understood the strategic value of the corridor, and while no direct evidence of a continuous wall from their era exists, the idea of defensive outposts and smaller fortifications along this vulnerable frontier wasn't new. Then came the Parthians, another powerful Persian dynasty that preceded the Sassanians. They too faced nomadic pressures from the north. It's a bit like living in a house where the previous owners tried to fix a leaky roof with a bucket and some duct tape. It might have held for a while, but it wasn't a permanent solution. These earlier fortifications were often isolated forts or short segments of walls designed to protect specific settlements or crucial passes. They served as early warning systems, places for local garrisons to muster, and perhaps temporary refuges for the local populace during raids. But they lacked the scale, the coherence, and the sheer ambition of the Sassanid project. The Sassanid rulers, with their superior engineering capabilities and centralized authority, were able to synthesize these earlier, piecemeal efforts into something far more grand and systematic. They learned from the successes and failures of their predecessors, understanding that a truly effective defense against highly mobile raiders required a continuous barrier, something that didn't just protect a spot, but an entire region. Historians still argue whether the Sassanians deliberately incorporated any existing Parthian defensive structures into the Gorgan walls design, or if they simply built anew on a similar defensive logic. But the incremental evolution of defensive architecture in the region is clear. This slow buildup of defensive knowledge, piece by quiet piece, contributed to the eventual design of the Grand Red Snake. Now that we've gently floated past the earlier, more modest attempts at defense, let's settle our gaze on the unequivocal wall's purpose. Why, precisely, did the Sassanian Empire embark on such a monumental, centuries-long project? It wasn't just for a bit of extra curb appeal for the empire, nor was it a particularly ambitious garden wall. No, the driving force behind the Great Wall of Gorgan was starkly pragmatic, defensive strategy against northern invaders. Imagine yourself as a Sassanid border guard, peering out over the vast, flat plains that stretch northward. On a clear day, the horizon might seem utterly empty, peaceful, perhaps even a little boring. But then, a dust cloud appears, small at first, like a distant whisper on the wind, then growing, churning, hinting at something much larger, much faster. These were the nomadic tribes, often Turkic peoples, who, as we've discussed, were not known for their polite invitations or their respect for property lines. They were horsemen, swift and agile, able to cover vast distances with alarming speed, striking at vulnerable settlements, disrupting trade routes, and then disappearing back into the seemingly endless steppe before any organized imperial response could truly materialize. The Sassanid state, for all its might, couldn't simply put a soldier on every square mile of its northern frontier. That would be an impossibly expensive and logistically nightmarish endeavor. So, they needed a solution that would deny the raiders their primary advantage: speed and surprise. A wall, a truly colossal barrier, was designed to do just that. It wasn't necessarily built to be impregnable, a magical shield that no one could ever get over, that would be a fairy tale. Instead, Its purpose was multifaceted. Firstly, it was a deterrent. Imagine coming across a wall that stretches for hundreds of kilometers, dotted with forts and watchtowers, manned by soldiers. It would certainly make you think twice about just waltzing across the border. Secondly, and perhaps more importantly, it was an impediment. Even if raiders found a way to breach it, the wall would slow them down significantly. This delay, this precious time, would allow Sassanid garrisons to mobilize, to intercept the invaders, and to cut off their escape routes. It transformed a lightning raid into a slow, grinding siege, or a trapped skirmish. It's a bit like putting a really long, really inconvenient speed bump across an entire highway. It won't stop everyone, but it will certainly make them reconsider their driving habits. Thirdly, the wall served as a base for counter-operations. The forts along its length weren't just defensive strongpoints. They were also staging posts from which Sassanid forces could launch their own punitive expeditions into the steppe, projecting imperial power beyond the wall itself. It solidified the border, giving the empire a clear, defensible line to work from. Historians still argue whether the wall was primarily intended to stop mass migrations or smaller, more frequent raiding parties. Some theories suggest it was a response to specific, large-scale threats from groups like the Hephthalites, while others lean towards it being a continuous effort to manage persistent, low-level incursions. Whatever the precise nuance, its fundamental purpose was to control movement, to regulate who came in and when, transforming a porous frontier into a managed border, albeit at a truly staggering cost of labor and resources. As you gently drift over the ancient plains, now filled with the imagined bustle of a colossal construction project, we arrive at the sheer marvel of the Great Wall of Gorgan's design and scale. This wasn't just a haphazard pile of bricks. It was a sophisticated defensive system, planned and executed on a truly immense scale. When you think of a wall, you might envision a simple, straight line, perhaps a uniform barrier. But the Gorgan Wall, in its full glory, was far more complex. Imagine a brick barrier, often between 6 to 10 meters wide at its base, tapering slightly as it rose. Its height, based on archaeological estimates, would have varied, but could have been anywhere from 3 to 6 meters or more. This wasn't just a garden wall you could easily hop over after a few too many ancient Persian wines. This was a substantial, intimidating structure. Now, imagine this wall, this formidable brick serpent, stretching for approximately 195 kilometers. To put that into perspective, that's longer than Hadrian's Wall in Britain, which is a mere 117 kilometers, and significantly longer than the famous Antonine Wall in Scotland. In fact, it's considered the longest ancient single-phase brick wall in the world, a testament to Sassanid engineering and persistence. It truly earns its nickname, the Red Snake, as it slithers across the landscape, following the gentle undulations of the terrain, crossing rivers, and even traversing some low hills. It's a continuous line, punctuated at regular intervals by a series of fortifications and watchtowers. Think of these as the scales on the snake's back, each one a hardened point of defense. Along its length, archaeologists have identified over 30 forts, spaced every 10 to 50 kilometers. These forts weren't just small outposts. Some were quite large, encompassing areas of 2 to 5 hectares, large enough to house significant garrisons, supplies, and even small settlements. The design wasn't just about building a straight line. The Sassanian engineers incorporated natural features where possible, sometimes aligning the wall with rivers or existing topographical barriers, making their job a little less Herculean. The wall also featured a ditch on its northern, outward-facing side, often several meters deep and wide. This ditch wasn't just for dramatic effect. It served to impede cavalry charges and make direct assault on the wall even more difficult. It's like having a moat without the water, a significant obstacle in itself. Historians still argue whether the exact design principles were solely indigenous Sassanian innovations, or if they drew inspiration from earlier Roman or even Chinese defensive architecture. But the integration of wall, ditch, and forts demonstrates a highly developed understanding of military engineering. The sheer ambition of this design to create such a continuous and integrated defensive system across such a vast distance speaks volumes about the Sassanian Empire's capabilities and their determined approach to border security. It's almost as if they said, "We'll build a wall, and will make the steps pay for it with their inconvenience." As you envision the colossal scale and sophisticated design of the Great Wall of Gorgan, let's turn our attention to its most distinctive feature, its striking appearance, which earned it the evocative moniker, the Red Snake. Imagine, if you will, the sun rising over the Gorgan plain, casting a warm golden light across the landscape. As the light strengthens, the wall itself begins to glow, not with the dull gray of typical stone, but with a deep, earthy red, a color that would have stood out vibrantly against the green-brown of the surrounding steppe. This isn't some artistic embellishment. It's a direct result of the primary construction material, red bricks. And not just any red bricks, but bricks fired from local loess soil, a type of fine, fertile sediment that gives them their characteristic hue. You see, the Gorgan region is naturally rich in this reddish-brown loess, deposited over millennia by wind. This made it an ideal and readily available resource for brickmaking. The brick kilns themselves would have been a significant part of the construction effort, churning out literally millions, if not billions, of bricks. Picture the scene: immense piles of raw earth being mixed with water, shaped into molds by hand, and then laid out to dry in the sun. Once sufficiently air-dried, these green bricks would be stacked carefully in enormous kilns, fueled by wood or brushwood gathered from the surrounding areas. The heat from these kilns would transform the soft, dried mud into hard, durable, fire-resistant bricks, baking that distinctive red color right into their very core. It's a process that hasn't fundamentally changed much in millennia, a slow, methodical transformation from earth to building block. You might even find the rhythmic crackle and pop of an ancient brick kiln to be quite soothing if you could hear it. This extensive use of brick, rather than quarried stone, is what truly sets the Gorgan Wall apart from many other ancient defensive structures, especially those in more mountainous or rocky regions. It highlights the ingenuity of the Sassanian builders, adapting their methods to the resources immediately at hand. While stone might have been more durable in some contexts, the sheer quantity of bricks needed meant that local production was not just convenient, but essential. Historians still argue whether the consistent red color was a deliberate aesthetic choice to intimidate invaders, or simply a byproduct of the available materials, but its visual impact would have been undeniable. The wall truly would have snaked across the landscape, a long, continuous line of reddish-brown, a silent testament to the vast scale of the Sassanian state's ambition and its profound ability to mobilize resources. So, As you picture this ancient barrier, don't imagine gray stone. Instead, envision that vibrant, earthy red, glowing under the Persian sun, a truly unforgettable red snake. With the image of the red snake firmly in your mind, let's delve deeper into the very substance of its creation, the construction materials, specifically the fascinating process of sourcing and preparing those distinctive red bricks and their accompanying mortar. You might imagine ancient construction as a frantic, messy affair, but here, there was an almost rhythmic, perhaps even meditative, quality to the repetitive tasks. The primary material, as we've discussed, was loess, a fine, silty soil, often reddish-brown, that is abundant in the Gorgan region. Think of it as a natural, pre-mixed ingredient for a giant, earthen cake. The first step involved excavating the loess. This would have been done by countless laborers, likely using simple tools, shovels, picks, and baskets to carry the loosened soil. Picture them moving in slow, steady rhythms, digging into the earth, creating shallow depressions that, over time, might have even become small, localized quarries. The sheer volume of earth moved for a wall nearly 200 kilometers long is almost incomprehensible. Once extracted, the loess needed preparation. It would be mixed with water, sometimes with straw or other organic temperants added to improve its binding properties and prevent cracking during drying and firing. This was a messy, hands-on job, probably done by treading, where groups of workers would literally stomp through the mud, mixing it to the right consistency. Imagine the squelching sound, the thick, earthy smell, the rhythmic movement of dozens of feet, like a slow, ancient dance of mud. Then came the molding of the bricks. This was a skilled task, done by specialized teams. Wooden molds, uniform in size, would be filled with the prepared mud, carefully pressed to remove air bubbles, and then inverted to release a perfectly shaped green brick. These bricks would then be laid out in vast, sun-drenched drying fields, slowly hardening under the Persian sun. This natural drying process was crucial. It removed much of the moisture, making the bricks stable enough for firing. You can almost feel the dry warmth of the sun on your skin. Hear the soft rustle of dry grass as the sun-baked bricks cooled. Finally, the dried bricks were transported to kilns for firing. These kilns were often large, temporary structures built near the wall itself, or at strategic points along its length to minimize transport distances. They were typically fueled by wood, brushwood, or even dried dung, creating immense heat that vitrified the clay, turning it from fragile mud into durable ceramic. The temperature and duration of the firing process dictated the final strength and color of the bricks, often resulting in that deep, consistent red. As for the mortar, it would have been a simple lime-based mix, perhaps incorporating local sand, providing a strong adhesive to bind the bricks together. Historians still argue whether the exact composition of the mortar varied significantly along different sections of the wall, or if a standardized formula was used throughout the entire project. But its effectiveness is evident in the wall's enduring remnants. The methodical, almost meditative repetition of these tasks, digging, mixing, molding, drying, firing, laying, day after day, year after year, formed the very slow heartbeat of the Great Wall of Gorgan. As the sun gently arcs across the sky, casting long shadows over the imagined brick kilns and drying fields, our focus shifts from the materials themselves to the living, breathing element that brought them together, the labor force, who were the countless individuals, the silent multitude, whose hands shaped the mud, lifted the bricks, and painstakingly laid each course. This is a question that, in the quiet contemplation of ancient history, carries a certain weight, a testament to the immense human effort behind such a monumental undertaking. Unlike some ancient projects, like the pyramids of Egypt, for which there's a popular image of enslaved populations, the Sassanian Empire's labor practices were more complex and, perhaps, more varied. It's highly probable that the core of the workforce comprised military engineers and soldiers. The Sassanian army wasn't just a fighting force, it was also a massive engineering corps, capable of constructing bridges, siege engines, and, naturally, fortifications. These were disciplined, organized units, accustomed to large-scale projects and long periods of strenuous work. Imagine platoons of soldiers, not just training with swords and shields, but also with shovels and mallets, their movements precise and coordinated, working under the watchful eye of military overseers. This would provide a steady, reliable source of labor, especially for the more specialized tasks like surveying and initial construction. Beyond the standing army, it's also highly likely that conscripted civilian labor played a significant role. In many ancient empires, it was common practice for subjects to owe a certain amount of labor, compulsory, unpaid work for the state. This could involve men from local villages being drafted for periods to contribute to public works projects. Think of it as a form of ancient taxation, paid not in coin, but in sweat and muscle. These would have been farmers, artisans, and other common folk, perhaps less enthusiastic than the professional soldiers, but nonetheless vital to the sheer scale of the operation. There might have been a sense of communal duty, perhaps even pride, in contributing to the defense of their homeland, or more realistically, the fear of imperial displeasure. If they didn't show up, it's a bit like being called for jury duty, but instead of sitting in a courtroom, you're lugging heavy bricks. Finally, while definitive evidence is scarce, it's not entirely out of the question that war captives or enslaved persons might have been utilized for some of the heaviest or most dangerous work. However, this was likely not the primary or exclusive source of labor, as it would be logistically challenging to manage and sustain such a massive enslaved workforce over generations for a project like this. Historians still argue whether the exact composition of the labor force remained constant throughout the wall's long construction period, or if it shifted depending on the prevailing political climate, military needs, and available resources. What is clear is that the construction of the Great Wall of Gorgan demanded an astonishing level of manpower, organized and sustained over decades, a testament to the Sassanian state's ability to mobilize its population for long-term strategic goals. The rhythmic thud of feet, the scrape of tools, the grunts of exertion. These were the unseen sounds accompanying the slow, patient rise of the red snake. As your imagined gaze settles on the slow, methodical work of the countless laborers, it's time to appreciate the true brilliance beneath the brick and mortar, the engineering feats that allowed the Sassanians to undertake such a massive and continuous undertaking. This wasn't just about piling bricks. It involved sophisticated planning, an understanding of hydrology, and innovative techniques for building on a grand scale. You see, building a wall that stretches nearly 200 kilometers across varied terrain is no small feat. Even with modern machinery, in ancient times, it demanded an almost unimaginable level of precision and ingenuity. One of the most impressive aspects was the surveying and planning that must have preceded and accompanied the construction. Imagine teams of Sassanian engineers, perhaps using simple sighting tools, ropes, and markers, meticulously plotting the wall's course across plains, over small hills, and through river valleys. They had to account for changes in elevation, soil stability, and the strategic importance of various points. This was land management on a scale that few ancient civilizations could achieve, requiring a detailed understanding of the geography. It's a bit like trying to draw a perfectly straight line across a crumpled bedsheet. You need to understand the contours before you can even begin. Another remarkable engineering achievement was the management of water resources. This arid region, while fertile in parts, also experienced seasonal droughts and unpredictable rainfall. As we've seen, brick production requires immense amounts of water, not just for mixing the clay, but also for the laborers themselves. The Sassanians developed a sophisticated system of canals and quainots to bring water to the construction sites and later to the forts that dotted the wall's length. These were not simply ditches. Quainots are intricate systems of tunnels dug into hillsides to tap into underground water sources, often stretching for kilometers. This required expert knowledge of geology and hydraulics, ensuring a steady, reliable water supply for both construction and sustaining the garrisons. You can almost hear the gentle trickle of water, a constant, vital sound against the dry landscape. Furthermore, the construction of the wall itself required impressive techniques. For instance, creating the uniform, high-quality bricks we discussed earlier on such a massive scale points to a highly organized system of production and quality control. Building the wall's robust foundation, especially in areas with softer soil, would have involved careful excavation and layering to prevent subsidence. And then there's the sheer verticality of the wall, sometimes reaching significant heights, which required the use of scaffolding and ramps to lift the bricks and mortar. Historians still argue whether the Sassanian engineers utilized any specific mathematical formulas or geometric principles, similar to those employed by Roman architects, or if their knowledge was primarily empirical, based on generations of practical experience and learned skills. Regardless, the evidence of their capabilities is literally written in the landscape, a testament to the quiet, persistent genius of ancient Sassanian engineering. This slow, deliberate application of knowledge, piece by careful piece, formed the backbone of the Red Snake's ascent. Having marveled at the sophisticated engineering, let's zoom in on a specific, crucial element of that ingenuity: the water management system. This wasn't just a convenience for the builders and inhabitants of the Gorgan Wall. It was an absolute necessity for survival and for the very act of construction. You see, building a massive brick wall in a relatively arid region presents a fundamental challenge. Where do you get the water for mixing mortar, firing bricks, and, crucially, for sustaining the thousands of workers and later the garrisons? The Sassanians, with their remarkable foresight, addressed this with an ingenious, often unseen, network of canals and cisterns. Imagine, if you will, the broad, flat plains of Gorgan, occasionally fed by seasonal rivers flowing down from the Alborz Mountains. These rivers, however, are notoriously unreliable, sometimes raging torrents, sometimes mere trickles. Relying on them alone for a continuous, multi-generational construction project would be a recipe for disaster. So, the Sassanian engineers devised a system to capture and transport water, a silent, flowing lifeline for the Red Snake. The most prominent feature of this system was a series of feeder canals that branched off from the main rivers, like the Gorgan River itself, diverting water directly to the wall's construction sites and later to the numerous forts that dotted its length. Picture these canals, dug patiently by hand, sometimes lined with stone or brick, carrying the precious liquid across the landscape. You can almost hear the soft gurgle of water, a sound of life and productivity in an otherwise dry environment. Even more impressive were the cisterns and reservoirs strategically placed along the wall. These were large, often underground, structures designed to collect and store rainwater, or water diverted from the canals, ensuring a supply even during dry periods. Imagine vast, cool, subterranean chambers, carefully constructed to prevent leakage, holding reserves of water for when the surface sources ran low. These were not just simple holes in the ground. They were engineered structures, sometimes with filter systems to keep the water clean. It's a bit like having a massive, ancient water cooler every few kilometers, ensuring that thirst or the need for more mortar never brought construction to a halt. Now, a quirky, often overlooked detail, while not directly part of the Gorgan Wall's immediate water supply, the Sassanians were masters of quinots. These subterranean aqueducts, a network of gently sloping tunnels dug from a water source to a lower outlet, were a hallmark of Persian hydraulic engineering. While the wall itself primarily used surface canals, the underlying knowledge of quinots and the skills involved in digging and maintaining them would have been part of the broader Sassanian engineering expertise that contributed to their water management prowess. Historians still argue whether the scale and sophistication of the Gorgan Wall's water management system was entirely unprecedented for its time, or if it drew heavily on existing Roman or earlier Persian irrigation techniques. What is certain, however, is that without this silent, flowing network, the red snake would never have been able to emerge from the dry earth. The slow, patient work of digging, channeling, and storing water was as fundamental to the wall's existence as the laying of each brick. With the immense structure of the Great Wall of Gorgan slowly taking shape in your mind, supported by its ingenious water systems, let's turn our attention to the lives of those who called it home, at least temporarily. The garrison life. Imagine yourself as a Sassanid soldier, stationed on a watchtower or within one of the sturdy forts that punctuate the Red Snake. Life here wasn't about glorious battles every day. It was a slow, often monotonous existence, punctuated by periods of intense vigilance and the constant rhythms of military routine. You'd be living within the sturdy brick walls of a fort, perhaps one of the larger ones, which could house hundreds of soldiers. These forts weren't just barracks. They were miniature, self-sufficient communities. Picture modest living quarters, communal dining areas, storage rooms for provisions, armories for weapons, and perhaps even small workshops for repairs. The air would likely be thick with the smell of wood smoke, cooking fires, and the faint metallic temps of arms. Your days would be structured by the rising and setting of the sun and the changing of the guard. You'd wake with the first light, perhaps to the distant sound of bugles or drums, and begin your daily duties. A significant portion of your time would be spent on vigilance and patrolling. You'd take your turn on the ramparts, scanning the vast northern plains for any sign of movement, any dust cloud that might herald an approaching raiding party. The wind would whisper secrets past your ears, and the sun would bake down on your helmet. You might patrol sections of the wall between forts, a slow, rhythmic march, your eyes constantly sweeping the horizon. It's a bit like being a very, very old-fashioned security guard for a particularly long, quiet fence. When not on active duty, you'd be involved in training and maintenance. Soldiers needed to keep their skills sharp, practicing with their spears, bows, and swords. The wall itself, being a brick structure exposed to the elements, would require constant upkeep. You might find yourself helping with minor repairs, patching mortar, or clearing debris from the ditch. This was a continuous, almost meditative process, ensuring the wall remained a formidable barrier. For sustenance, the garrisons would rely on supplies brought in from the interior of the empire, often grain, dried meat, and other preserved foodstuffs. But they likely also engaged in some local agriculture or foraging to supplement their rations. Imagine small garden plots within the fort walls, or soldiers tending to a flock of sheep nearby, adding a touch of domesticity to the harsh military life. A quirky tidbit, ancient graffiti found on some walls, though not specifically at Gorgan, sometimes depicts bored soldiers playing board games or sketching crude images, hinting at the long hours spent waiting. Historians still argue whether the turnover rate for these garrisons was high, with soldiers rotating in and out frequently, or if extended tours of duty were common, leading to deep camaraderie or perhaps deep boredom among the troops. Regardless, the daily routines of these Sassanian soldiers, a slow rhythm of watchfulness and maintenance, were the living pulse that kept the Great Wall of Gorgan alive and effective. As the subtle hum of ancient military life fades into the background, let's now turn our attention to the physical manifestations of that vigilance, the watchtowers and forts themselves, and their indispensable role in defense and communication along the sprawling length of the Great Wall of Gorgan. These weren't merely decorative bumps on the red snake. They were the eyes, ears, and strongholds of the Sassanian defensive system, turning a static barrier into a dynamic and responsive frontier. Imagine yourself ascending one of these watchtowers. They would have been tall, perhaps multi-storied structures, often square or rectangular in plan, built from the same sturdy red brick as the wall itself. As you climb the internal staircase, perhaps feeling the cool, rough surface of the bricks beneath your hand, you reach the top. From this elevated vantage point, your gaze sweeps across the immense plains to the north. This was the primary function of the watchtowers: early detection. Spotting approaching groups, even small ones, from a distance was crucial. The vast, flat landscape, while a boon for swift raiders, also offered little cover, making distant dust clouds or the glint of distant weapons relatively easy to see, especially from a raised platform. It's a bit like having a really, really tall periscope in the middle of nowhere. Each watchtower would have been garrisoned by a small contingent of soldiers, perhaps just a handful, whose lives revolved around constant observation. They would have been equipped with signal fires or other means of rapid communication. Upon sighting an approaching threat, smoke signals by day or prearranged fire signals by night would have been ignited, sending a chain reaction down the wall, alerting neighboring towers and, crucially, the larger forts. This signal system allowed for a surprisingly swift warning across considerable distances, giving the Sassanian command centers time to react and mobilize their forces. The forts, on the other hand, were much larger and more substantial. As we touched on before, there were over 30 of them, strategically spaced along the wall. These weren't just fortified encampments, they were integrated military bases. Picture their imposing walls, often thicker and higher than the wall itself, encompassing barracks, stables for cavalry, storage facilities for food and water, workshops for repairs, and sometimes even small residential areas for non-military personnel who supported the garrison. These forts served several vital purposes. Firstly, they were strongholds. If a section of the wall was breached, the fort provided a secure refuge for the defenders and a base from which counterattacks could be launched. Secondly, they were staging posts. Cavalry units, crucial for intercepting raiding parties, would have been housed here, ready to ride out at a moment's notice. Thirdly, they were command centers for their respective sections of the wall, managing patrols, coordinating responses, and relaying intelligence back up the chain of command. A quirky detail is that some archaeological evidence suggests there might have been specific signal paths or small dedicated trails running parallel to the wall, used by runners or mounted messengers to supplement the visual signals, ensuring crucial information got through even in adverse weather. Historians still argue whether the spacing of the forts was purely based on defensive strategy or also influenced by the availability of water sources or suitable building terrain. Regardless, the network of watchtowers and forts, working in conjunction with the massive brick wall, formed a living, breathing, if slowly operating, defensive organism, constantly scanning the horizon and relaying its findings through the silent language of smoke and flame. As our slow journey along the Great Wall of Gorgan continues, you might find yourself contemplating the immense undertaking required to sustain such a vast defensive system. It wasn't just about building the wall and manning its forts. It was about the continuous, painstaking process of logistics and supply. Imagine the sheer volume of resources needed to feed, clothe, and equip thousands of laborers during construction. And then, for centuries, the numerous garrisons stationed along the wall. Think about the food alone. An army, or a large workforce, quite literally marches on its stomach. Grain, wheat, or barley would have been the staple, brought in from the fertile agricultural heartlands of the Sassanian Empire. This meant agricultural production on a massive scale, coordinated with a sophisticated system of collection and transportation. Picture long caravans of donkeys, camels, or ox carts laden with sacks of grain, slowly making their way along ancient roads, heading towards the wall. You can almost hear the creak of wooden wheels, the gentle jingle of camel bells, a constant, low-level background hum of ancient commerce. Beyond grain, there would have been a need for preserved meats, dried fruits, pulses, and perhaps even a bit of salt, essential for both preservation and flavor in a diet that could otherwise be quite monotonous. And don't forget the water, which we've already explored. While the local systems were impressive, supplementary water, especially for large concentrations of people or during extended dry spells, would have needed to be transported. It's a bit like trying to run a massive, miles-long picnic for centuries without a grocery store nearby. Then there are the tools and materials themselves. We've talked about bricks and mortar, but consider the picks, shovels, and hammers used by the laborers. There would have been a continuous demand for iron ore, for skilled blacksmiths to forge new tools, and for a system to deliver these implements to the remote construction sites. Timber for scaffolding, for kill fuel, and for roof construction in the forts would also have been a crucial, heavy commodity to transport. Imagine the forests being slowly, methodically thinned to feed the insatiable maw of the brick kilns and construction effort. Furthermore, the garrisons needed weapons and armor, not just initially, but as replacements for wear and tear, or for new recruits. Swords, spears, bows, arrows, shields, all had to be manufactured, stored, and then transported to the various forts along the Red Snake. This required a sophisticated network of state-run arsenals and workshops. Historians still argue whether the supply lines for the Gorgan Wall were purely state-controlled, or if local populations were also heavily relied upon to contribute provisions through taxation or compulsory sales, adding another layer of complexity to this ancient logistical puzzle. The quiet, persistent flow of goods and resources, a logistical marvel in itself, was as integral to the wall's longevity as the bricks that formed its formidable structure. Having considered the monumental logistical effort involved in sustaining the Great Wall of Gorgan, let's now contemplate the myriad challenges that confronted its builders and the ongoing garrisons. This wasn't a project built in a sterile, controlled environment. It was constructed in a living, breathing landscape, subject to the whims of nature and the unpredictable nature of human endeavor. These obstacles added layers of difficulty, slowing the pace and demanding constant adaptation. Imagine first the sheer force of the environmental obstacles. The Gorgan Plain, while often dry, also experiences periods of significant rainfall, especially in winter. Heavy rains could turn the construction sites into muddy quagmires, making transportation of materials difficult and halting brick production. Flooding rivers could damage sections of the wall under construction, or even finished parts, requiring extensive repairs and delaying progress. Then there's the intense heat of the summer, particularly in a region without modern climate control. Working under a relentless sun, day after day, would have been brutally exhausting, leading to dehydration, heat stroke, and a slower pace of work. You can almost feel the sweat trickling down your brow, the dust sticking to your skin, making every movement a conscious effort. It's a bit like trying to build a sandcastle on a beach, where the tide keeps coming in and the sun is constantly trying to melt it. Beyond the weather, the terrain itself presented challenges. While largely flat, the wall had to cross numerous rivers and smaller waterways. This required the construction of bridges or reinforced sections that could withstand seasonal floods, adding complexity and specific engineering problems for each crossing. Maintaining the integrity of the ditch in softer soils or preventing erosion would have been a continuous battle against the forces of nature. Then there were the human difficulties. Labor management on such a scale was a monumental task, keeping thousands of workers, whether soldiers or conscripts, motivated and productive over decades would have required strict discipline and efficient organization. Illnesses, accidents, and desertion would have been constant concerns. A simple outbreak of dysentery or a serious injury could sideline dozens of workers, impacting the overall pace. Maintaining morale in a remote, often monotonous environment would have been a challenge in itself. And, of course, there was the ever-present threat of the very invaders the wall was designed to deter. Raids, even if unsuccessful in breaching the wall, could disrupt supply lines, harass workers, and force the diversion of resources to defensive actions. A quirky detail to ponder is the potential for local flora and fauna to pose problems. Perhaps stubborn root systems made digging foundations difficult, or local pests plagued the stored food supplies. Historians still argue whether some sections of the wall remained unfinished due to insurmountable environmental challenges. or if political shifts and changing strategic priorities were the primary reasons for any halt in construction. These constant low-level struggles against nature and human frailty were an inherent part of the Great Wall of Gorgan's long, slow ascent from the earth. With all the challenges laid bare, it's time to consider the fundamental rhythm of this ancient undertaking: the construction pace. You might be accustomed to thinking of major infrastructure projects in terms of years, perhaps a decade or two, with modern machinery and techniques. But the Great Wall of Gorgan was built in an era defined by human muscle, simple tools, and the sheer persistence of countless hands. The pace was, by modern standards, incredibly slow, a testament to the colossal scale of the project and the limitations of ancient technology. Imagine the rhythmic clinking of picks against soil, the scrape of shovels, the soft squelch of mortar being mixed, and the gentle thud as another sun-dried brick is carefully set into place. Each of these sounds represents a minute, painstaking step in a process that unfolded not over years, but over decades, and likely even centuries. While pinpointing an exact start and end date for the wall is challenging due to the fragmented nature of historical records and ongoing archaeological debate, it's generally accepted that construction spanned the Sassanian period, from perhaps the late 4th or early 5th century CE, with evidence of later additions and repairs. This means generations of workers might have contributed to the same segments of the wall. Your grandfather might have laid bricks on one section, and you, decades later, would be working on another. Consider the sheer volume: approximately 195 kilometers of wall, often 6 to 10 meters wide at the base and several meters high, that requires millions, if not billions, of bricks. Even if an individual bricklayer could lay a respectable number of bricks in a day, say 100 or two, when you multiply that by the immense length and height of the wall, and factor in the time for digging foundations, preparing mortar, firing bricks, and transporting materials, the overall daily progress would have been minuscule. You'd be lucky to see a few meters of wall rise in a day, perhaps only a few dozen centimeters in some complex sections. It's a bit like watching grass grow. If the grass were made of very heavy, very slow-moving bricks, the pace would also have been dictated by the seasons. Work would likely slow significantly, or even halt during the intense heat of summer or the muddy conditions of winter rains. This means that active construction might have only been feasible for a portion of each year, further extending the overall timeline. The project was not a sprint. It was an incredibly long, drawn-out marathon, with no finish line in sight for any individual worker. This slow, laborious rate of building means that the Red Snake truly was a project of imperial ambition and sustained commitment, transcending individual reigns and passing from one generation of builders to the next. Historians still argue whether there were periods of intense, rapid construction followed by long lulls, perhaps linked to specific military threats, or periods of greater imperial stability, or if the building was a more consistently slow grind throughout its operational history. What is certain is that the wall's silent presence today is a testament to the unhurried yet unstoppable force of ancient human labor. As the slow, rhythmic pace of construction settles into your imagination, a new, quieter question emerges. Why did it all stop? Why was such a colossal project, a multi-generational endeavor like the Great Wall of Gorgan, eventually abandoned? The theories surrounding its cessation are as fascinating and nuanced as its construction, painting a picture of shifting priorities, new threats, and the inexorable march of history. It wasn't a sudden, dramatic collapse, but more likely a gradual cessation, a slow fading of imperial will and resources. One prominent theory for the abandonment theories points to changing strategic priorities. The Sassanian Empire, for all its might, was constantly engaged in a geopolitical tug-of-war, while the northern nomadic tribes were a persistent nuisance. The greater, more existential threats often came from the west, from the Byzantine Empire. It's a bit like having a leaky roof. When your entire house is being battered by a hurricane, resources, both human and financial, would naturally be diverted to the most pressing, large-scale conflicts. If the empire was constantly raising armies for the Western Front, maintaining a massive construction project on the northern frontier might have become an unaffordable luxury. Another significant factor, often linked to the first, was the rise of new, more formidable threats that rendered the wall's specific defensive strategy less effective. While the wall was designed to impede nomadic cavalry, the late Sassanian period saw the emergence of even more powerful and organized groups, such as the Hephthalites, who posed a significant threat from the northeast. These were not just raiding parties. They were often unified forces, capable of large-scale military campaigns, perhaps even equipped with siegecraft that could overcome static defenses. A wall, no matter how grand, can only do so much against an organized invasion force determined to breach it. Furthermore, internal political instability or economic strain within the vast Sassanian Empire could have played a role. Maintaining such a large empire was incredibly expensive, requiring a robust taxation system and efficient administration. Periods of internal strife, succession crises, or economic downturns could have severely impacted the state's ability to fund and oversee such a long-term project. When the imperial coffers were strained, grand construction projects are often the first to be put on hold. Finally, and perhaps most poignantly, the ultimate abandonment of the wall, or at least its effective use, coincides with the Arab-Islamic conquests of the mid-7th century CE. The rapid and devastating advance of the Muslim armies from the south completely overwhelmed the Sassanian Empire, bringing an end to over 4 centuries of Persian rule. In the face of such an existential threat, a wall in the north would have become irrelevant, its garrisons likely drawn away to defend the heartland, or simply overrun. Historians still argue whether the wall was genuinely abandoned and fell into disuse before the Arab conquest, or if its functionality simply ceased to matter in the face of a completely new geopolitical reality. Regardless, the slow, silent process of nature reclaiming the red snake began, leaving it to slowly crumble back into the earth from which it rose. As the red snake slowly recedes into the realm of the forgotten, its purpose fulfilled or rendered obsolete, you might wonder how such a colossal structure could simply vanish from common knowledge. This brings us to the fascinating story of its historical records, or, more accurately, the puzzling scarcity of them. You see, for a structure of its immense scale and strategic importance, the Great Wall of Gorgan is remarkably absent from detailed contemporary accounts. It's a bit like building the Empire State Building and then forgetting to mention it in any of the city's guidebooks. Imagine searching through ancient Persian chronicles, Byzantine histories, or even Chinese diplomatic reports. While these texts might allude to general defensive efforts or nomadic incursions, specific, detailed mentions of the Red Snake by name its construction phases, or the exact rulers who championed it, are surprisingly few and far between. This silence is, in itself, a historical enigma. Why would such a monumental project, a testament to imperial power and engineering prowess, not be more widely celebrated or meticulously documented? One reason could be that much of the Sassanian administrative and historical records have simply not survived the ravages of time, conflict, and subsequent cultural shifts. The Arab-Islamic conquests, while bringing about a new era, also led to the destruction or loss of countless previous records. Imagine libraries burned, archives scattered, and oral traditions fading over generations. So, it's not necessarily that the Sassanians didn't record it, but that their records didn't endure. Another possibility is that the wall was simply considered part of the routine, ongoing business of border defense, rather than a singular epoch-making event that merited extensive individual commentary. Think of it this way. Modern governments don't issue detailed daily press releases about every mile of highway construction. It's just part of the infrastructure budget. Perhaps the Gorgan Wall was viewed similarly, a massive but ultimately practical project that was simply part of the imperial background noise. A quirky tidbit: some very late Sassanian or early Islamic era geographical texts do mention a wall of Gog and Magog in the region, a reference that might vaguely allude to the Gorgan Wall, possibly conflating it with other legendary defensive structures. However, these mentions are often more mythical than factual, offering little concrete detail. Furthermore, Byzantine sources, who were often the Sassanians' primary rivals, and thus keen observers, tend to focus more on the western frontier and specific military campaigns, rather than internal Sassanian defensive works in the north. Historians still argue whether the lack of detailed records indicates a deliberate policy of secrecy regarding military infrastructure, or simply reflects a different emphasis in ancient historical writing compared to our modern expectations. Regardless, the wall's quiet existence for centuries, largely unheralded in the written word, made its eventual rediscovery all the more surprising. It was as if the earth itself had kept its secret, slowly revealing it over millennia. From the quiet void of historical records, let's now transition to the exciting and sometimes dusty process of the Great Wall of Gorgan's rediscovery. For centuries, this colossal structure lay largely forgotten, slowly crumbling back into the earth, its brickwork obscured by vegetation and the accumulated dust of millennia. It was known to local inhabitants, of course, as an ancient, elongated earthwork, perhaps woven into local folklore, but its true scale and significance were lost to wider historical consciousness. The re-emergence of the red snake onto the world stage is a testament to the persistent curiosity of archaeologists and the gradual evolution of our understanding of ancient Persia. The first hints of its true nature began to appear in the 18th and 19th centuries, when European travelers and explorers venturing into what was then Qajar Persia noted unusual linear earthworks in the Gorgan Plain. These early observations were often fleeting, part of broader travelogues, and didn't immediately spark widespread academic interest. Think of it as catching a glimpse of something unusual out of the corner of your eye. Intriguing, but not yet fully understood. It wasn't until the 20th century that more systematic investigations began to take shape. British scholars and military officers, with an interest in the geopolitics of the region and a growing fascination with ancient civilizations, started to pay closer attention. One notable figure was W.E. O'Donovan, a British officer who, in the early 1900s, ostensibly mapped parts of the wall, providing some of the first relatively accurate surveys. However, true archaeological efforts, with methodical excavation and scientific analysis, really only began to gather momentum in the late 20th and early 21st centuries. Iranian archaeologists, often in collaboration with international teams, started to meticulously uncover sections of the wall, excavating the forts, and studying the brickwork and associated artifacts. These were slow, painstaking digs, involving the careful removal of layers of soil, often under challenging conditions. You can almost feel the dry earth sifting through your fingers. Hear the gentle clink of a trowel hitting something solid, the patient unearthing of history, one layer at a time. This modern archaeological work didn't just confirm the wall's existence. It began to reveal its true scale, its construction techniques, and its surprising complexity. It was a process of piecing together fragments, like solving a giant, ancient puzzle with many missing pieces. Each unearthed brick, each excavated fort, contributed to a growing understanding of this forgotten marvel. A quirky tidbit is that local shepherds and farmers would have known parts of the wall for generations, sometimes even incorporating crumbling sections into their own enclosures, or using the old bricks for new buildings without fully understanding its historical significance. Historians still argue whether the initial disinterest from mainstream historians in the West was due to a Eurocentric bias, focusing more on Roman or Greek antiquities, or simply the logistical difficulties of conducting extensive research in a historically complex region. Regardless, the slow, deliberate work of archaeologists has gradually peeled back the layers of time, allowing the red snake to slither back into our historical consciousness. As the slow, methodical work of archaeologists brought the Great Wall of Gorgan out of the shadows, a truly revolutionary tool emerged that would transform its rediscovery. Satellite imagery. Imagine yourself not gently hovering, but soaring silently high above the earth. A modern-day satellite camera as your eye. From this incredible vantage point, obscured by no trees or accumulated soil, the full, awe-inspiring extent of the red snake finally became unequivocally clear. Before satellite technology became widely accessible, archaeologists relied on ground surveys, aerial photography from planes, and old maps, all valuable but inherently limited. Ground surveys are painstakingly slow, and aerial photos can be obscured by vegetation or simply don't cover a wide enough area efficiently. But with the advent of high-resolution satellite imagery, especially in the late 20th and early 21st centuries, a new era of archaeological discovery dawned. Suddenly, what had been fragmented sections on the ground, known to local experts but not fully understood in their entirety, revealed themselves as a single, coherent, immense structure. Picture the satellite passing overhead, capturing vast swaths of the Gorgan plain. On the digital images, faint but unmistakable lines begin to emerge, tracing the course of the ancient wall, its accompanying ditch, and the regular spacing of its forts. The reddish hue of the buried bricks and the slight elevation of the wall often create subtle tonal differences in the landscape that are highly visible from space, even when they are barely discernible on the ground. It's like finding a hidden pattern in a vast, complex carpet that only becomes clear when you view it from a great distance. This technology allowed researchers to map the entire 195-kilometer length of the wall with unprecedented accuracy, identifying previously unknown sections and confirming the continuity of others. This top-down perspective was nothing short of a game-changer for Gorgan Wall research. It allowed archaeologists to direct their ground-based investigations more efficiently, pinpointing promising areas for excavation rather than relying on guesswork or limited historical accounts. It provided the irrefutable evidence of the wall's monumental scale, silencing any lingering doubts about its existence as a unified single-phase defensive system. It's a bit like finally seeing the whole jigsaw puzzle completed after only having a handful of corner pieces for centuries. A quirky tidbit is that some of the first researchers to extensively use satellite imagery for the Gorgan Wall were actually British archaeologists from the University of Edinburgh, who recognized the potential of declassified Cold War-era spy satellite images, which provided incredible detail of the landscape. Historians still argue whether the comprehensive understanding of the Gorgan Wall, only made possible by satellite imagery, fundamentally changes our perception of Sassanian military capabilities, placing them more firmly in the league of Roman or Chinese engineering, or if it merely confirms what careful ground surveys had already hinted at. What is undeniable is that, from the silent, orbital vantage point, the red snake finally revealed its full, remarkable truth to the modern world. With the Great Wall of Gorgan now fully revealed by the silent eye of satellites, let's descend gently back to Earth and explore what the patient work of excavating teams has actually brought to light. The archaeological finds. These aren't just pretty trinkets. They are the tangible whispers from the past, the objects that tell us tales of daily life, military routine, and the broader cultural context of the people who lived and worked along the Red Snake. Each shard of pottery, each rusted tool, is a tiny piece of a much larger, incredibly slow-motion jigsaw puzzle. Imagine the archaeologists, trowel in hand, carefully brushing away layers of millennial soil. What might they find? Perhaps one of the most common, yet incredibly informative, finds are pottery fragments. These aren't glamorous, but they are incredibly useful for dating. The style, shape, and even the type of clay used in ancient pottery changed over time, allowing archaeologists to assign dates to the different layers of the wall and its associated forts. You might find pieces of storage jars, cooking pots, or even humble bowls, hinting at the simple meals consumed by soldiers and laborers. Each fragment, gently handled, connects you to an ancient hand that once held it. It's like finding a broken teacup in your grandmother's attic and knowing it was once part of daily life. Beyond pottery, excavations within the forts have unearthed a variety of personal artifacts and military equipment. Small, corroded iron arrowheads or spear tips might be found, hinting at the weaponry used by the Sassanian garrisons. Perhaps a broken piece of a ceramic oil lamp used to provide a flickering light in the long, ancient nights, or small, decorative beads that might have adorned a soldier's tunic. These are the intimate details that bridge the vast chasm of time, allowing you to almost picture the soldier lighting their lamp before a long night watch. Tools are another common find, offering insights into the construction process itself. Fragments of iron shovels, picks, or even stone hammers could be discovered, providing direct evidence of the implements used to build the wall. You might even find small, flat stones that served as ancient grinding stones for grains, or hearths where fires were built, leaving behind telltale charcoal remnants that can be carbon dated. A quirky tidbit is the occasional discovery of ancient coins. These small pieces of metal, often bearing the likeness of Sassanid kings, are incredibly valuable for precise dating, as they can tell archaeologists exactly when a certain layer of soil was deposited or when a specific structure was in use. Imagine holding a coin that was last touched by a Sassanid soldier over 1,500 years ago. Historians still argue whether the prevalence of certain types of artifacts in different forts suggests varying levels of affluence, or specific military roles for the garrisons stationed there, or if it simply reflects the random nature of archaeological preservation. Regardless, these quiet, tangible objects, slowly unearthed from the silent earth, are the true storytellers of the Great Wall of Gorgan, giving voice to the long-forgotten lives lived along its colossal length. With the concrete evidence of archaeological finds now painting a clearer picture of life along the Red Snake, let's drift our thoughts to a fundamental question: its defensive effectiveness. Was the Great Wall of Gorgan, for all its immense scale and the centuries of labor invested in it, truly successful in its primary goal of protecting the Sassanian Empire from northern invaders? This isn't a simple yes or no answer. Historians still debate its true impact, seeing it as a complex interplay of successes and limitations. Imagine the perspective of a nomadic raider approaching this formidable barrier. From their standpoint, the wall was undeniably an imposing obstacle. It wasn't just a line on the ground. It was a continuous, high brick barrier, fronted by a deep ditch, dotted with watchtowers, and bristling with forts. It certainly would have made simple, opportunistic raids much more difficult, if not impossible. A lone rider or small band would find it incredibly hard to breach without being detected and intercepted. The wall essentially created a choke point out of an otherwise open plain, forcing any invaders to concentrate their forces at specific points, making them easier targets for Sassanid garrisons. It's like trying to sneak into a party when there's a very tall, very long fence with spotlights and security guards every few yards. Furthermore, the wall served as an early warning system, as we discussed with the watchtowers. The ability to detect an approaching force days or even weeks in advance allowed the Sassaniad military to mobilize their regional forces, intercept invaders, and prepare defenses. This reduction in the element of surprise was a significant strategic advantage. It prevented the lightning-fast hit-and-run raids that could devastate agricultural lands and disrupt trade without sufficient time for a response. However, its effectiveness was not absolute, and this is where the debate lies. A wall, no matter how grand, is only as strong as the will and resources behind it. The largest, most organized nomadic confederations, particularly those capable of sustained siege warfare or possessing superior numbers, could potentially bypass or overwhelm sections of the wall. If a powerful force decided to commit enough resources, they could potentially lay siege to a fort or find a weaker point and, given enough time and effort, breach it. The wall was designed to impede, not necessarily to be impregnable against a determined, large-scale invasion. A quirky detail is that some historians speculate that the wall's very existence might have inadvertently encouraged the development of more sophisticated siege tactics among the northern tribes, pushing them to evolve their military capabilities. Historians still argue whether the wall's true value lay primarily in deterring smaller, frequent incursions. thus protecting daily life and agriculture, or if it was also intended to provide a robust defense against major nomadic migrations, in which case its long-term success against such movements is less clear. Regardless, the Great Wall of Gorgan served its purpose for centuries, a silent testament to the strategic thinking of the Sassanian Empire, even if its ultimate effectiveness remains a subject of quiet, scholarly debate. As we consider the defensive effectiveness of the Great Wall of Gorgan, it's almost impossible not to draw an immediate, though often misleading, comparison to its more famous counterpart, the Great Wall of China. While both are monumental defensive barriers, and both were built to ward off nomadic threats from the north, distinguishing them reveals unique characteristics and dispels common misconceptions. You see, these two great walls are as different as a quiet, winding river is from a vast, thunderous ocean, despite both being bodies of water. The most immediate distinction lies in their construction materials and appearance. The Great Wall of Gorgan, as we've learned, is predominantly a brick structure, specifically those distinctive red bricks fired from local loess. Imagine that earthy, reddish hue snaking across the Iranian plain. The Great Wall of China, on the other hand, is famous for its use of stone and rammed earth, particularly its later, more iconic Ming Dynasty sections, while bricks were used in some parts of the Chinese wall, especially later on. The overall impression is one of gray stone, towering fortifications, and often incredibly steep inclines. It's a visual difference that sets them apart immediately. Secondly, consider their geographic and historical contexts. The Great Wall of Gorgan was built by the Sassanian Empire, a sophisticated Persian power, primarily in the flat semi-arid plains of what is now northeastern Iran. Its construction likely spanned a few centuries, though its exact timeline is debated. The Great Wall of China, however, is not a single, continuous wall, but rather a series of defensive lines built by various Chinese dynasties over more than 2 millennia. From the Qin dynasty right up to the Ming, it snakes across incredibly diverse terrain, from mountains to deserts, reflecting a much longer and more fragmented history of construction. It's like comparing a single, dedicated defensive line to a sprawling, ancient patchwork quilt of fortifications. Thirdly, the scale and continuous nature. While the Gorgan Wall is impressive at nearly 200 kilometers, the Great Wall of China, taking into account all its various branches and sections built over millennia, measures in the thousands of kilometers. However, the Gorgan Wall holds the unique distinction of being the longest ancient single-phase brick wall in the world. This means that, unlike the Chinese wall, which was often built in disconnected segments at different times, the Gorgan Wall appears to have been conceived and constructed as a single, coherent project, even if it took generations to complete. This speaks to a remarkable level of central planning and sustained imperial will within the Sassanian state for this particular project. A quirky tidbit: despite common popular belief, neither wall is truly visible from space with the naked eye. Despite what old-school textbooks might have claimed, they are just too narrow compared to their length. You need specialized satellite imagery, like we discussed, to properly discern them. Historians still argue whether there was any direct exchange of architectural or engineering knowledge between the Sassanian Empire and the Chinese dynasties regarding wall construction, or if similar defensive challenges simply led to parallel, independent innovations in both regions. Regardless, understanding these key differences helps us appreciate each wall for its own unique historical and engineering significance, rather than simply lumping them together as generic Great Walls. As we quietly distinguish the red snake from its more famous Chinese cousin, let's allow our minds to wander into the realm of local folklore and age-old wisdom, exploring the local legends and myths that have undoubtedly woven themselves around the Great Wall of Gorgan over centuries. You see, when a structure of such immense scale and mysterious origin stands for millennia, often silent and decaying, it naturally becomes fertile ground for stories, whispers passed down from generation to generation, shaping how local communities understand their ancient landscape. Imagine the shepherds of the Gorgan Plain, their flocks grazing near the weathered remains of the wall, telling tales by the flickering firelight. To them, this was not just a Sassanian defensive structure. It was a feature of their land, imbued with a life and purpose beyond mere brick and mortar. One common thread in such legends across many cultures is the idea of a supernatural builder. Perhaps it was thought that giants or ancient, powerful spirits were responsible for its impossible length, rather than mere human hands. This helps to explain something so vast that it seems to defy ordinary human capability. It's a bit like how children invent elaborate backstories for mundane objects. A powerful imagination filling in the gaps where facts are absent. Another recurring theme might involve mythical creatures associated with the wall, given its nickname, the Red Snake. Perhaps local tales spun yarns of a literal colossal serpent that slithered across the land, leaving its hardened skin behind. Or maybe protective spirits, fierce guardians, were believed to reside within the ancient forts, watching over the land even after the human garrisons were long gone. These stories serve not just to entertain, but often to explain the inexplicable or to impart a moral lesson about respect for the ancient past. Think too of legends surrounding its purpose or its builders. While we know its historical function was defense, local stories might have offered more dramatic or poetic explanations. Perhaps it was believed to be a barrier against monstrous beasts, or a boundary marking the edge of the known world. Some legends might even have attributed its construction to legendary figures from Persian mythology or epic poetry. Figures like Rostam or Esfandiyar, hero figures whose deeds were larger than life. This process of integrating the wall into a pre-existing cultural narrative is common for such ancient wonders. A quirky tidbit in some regions. Similar ancient structures are sometimes believed to have been built by devils or other malevolent forces overnight, as a test or a curse, offering a darker, more cautionary tale about unexplained large-scale constructions. Historians still argue whether some of these localized legends contain faint echoes of genuine historical memory, distorted over time, or if they are purely imaginative creations spun to make sense of a landscape dominated by a silent, inexplicable behemoth. Regardless, these charming and often poignant stories, whispered down through the centuries, contribute to the living, breathing history of the Great Wall of Gorgan, adding a layer of gentle magic to its brick and mortar reality. Having explored the whispers of local legends, let's bring our focus back to the present day and consider the modern impact of the Great Wall of Gorgan. This ancient structure isn't merely a curious archaeological ruin. Its rediscovery and ongoing study have had a significant, albeit often quiet, legacy and profound significance today, shaping our understanding of ancient empires and even influencing contemporary heritage efforts. Imagine the sense of quiet pride and wonder that rediscovering such a monumental structure instills in the people of modern Iran. The red snake is a powerful symbol of their rich, ancient heritage, demonstrating the advanced capabilities and long history of Persian civilization. It adds another layer to a national narrative that already includes legendary figures, magnificent art, and sophisticated empires. This heritage can foster a sense of identity and continuity, reminding people of the impressive achievements of their ancestors. It's like finding a long-lost, incredibly detailed family photo album that reveals a whole new dimension to your lineage. Beyond national pride, the wall contributes immensely to our global understanding of ancient military engineering and statecraft. Before its comprehensive mapping through satellite imagery and extensive archaeological work, the Sassanian Empire's defensive capabilities, particularly in the east, were perhaps underestimated. The Gorgan Wall now stands as prime evidence of their advanced strategic thinking, their ability to mobilize vast resources, and their mastery of large-scale construction. It allows historians to draw richer comparisons with other ancient empires, like Rome and China, providing a more balanced view of global ancient power dynamics. It offers a counterpoint to the more commonly studied Western empires, highlighting the diverse solutions developed by different civilizations to common problems. Furthermore, the wall serves as a crucial case study for archaeological methodology. Its study has pushed the boundaries of how satellite imagery and remote sensing can be integrated with traditional ground-based excavation, setting new standards for investigating vast, linear features that are difficult to discern from ground level. This has implications for discovering and mapping other hidden ancient structures around the world. A quirky detail to ponder is how the wall, even in its ruinous state, might subtly influence local agricultural practices. Farmers might have adapted their fields around its gentle undulations for centuries, perhaps unknowingly preserving its contours due to its minor elevation differences. Historians still argue whether the discovery of the Gorgan Wall should fundamentally alter the way we teach Sassanian history in schools and universities, giving more prominence to its engineering achievements, or if it primarily serves as a fascinating footnote to the more dominant narratives of military campaigns and dynastic struggles. Regardless, the red snake, once a silent guardian, now speaks volumes, quietly influencing our perception of the past and continuing to inspire contemporary research and appreciation for ancient ingenuity. As the Great Wall of Gorgan subtly influences our modern understanding, its very existence today poses a new set of responsibilities, preservation efforts. Imagine the delicate balance involved in protecting an ancient monument that spans nearly 200 kilometers, often lying beneath agricultural fields, roads, and even modern settlements, slowly succumbing to the relentless forces of nature and human encroachment. The challenges are immense, demanding a multifaceted approach and persistent dedication. One of the primary challenges to preservation is environmental degradation. The very elements that shaped its original materials continue to wear it down. Rain causes erosion, particularly to the exposed brickwork and the earthen ditch. Wind carries away fine soil, gradually uncovering some sections while burying others. The growth of vegetation, weeds, shrubs, and even small trees can damage the wall's structure as roots penetrate the brickwork, destabilizing it over time. It's like trying to keep an old, beloved book from falling apart when it's constantly being exposed to the elements and nibbled at by curious insects. This requires ongoing, careful maintenance, removing intrusive plant life and shoring up vulnerable sections. Another significant challenge comes from human activity, agricultural expansion. As farmers, unknowingly or knowingly, plow over sections of the wall, can cause irreversible damage. The construction of new roads, buildings, or even simple irrigation ditches can cut through the ancient structure, destroying precious archaeological information. Looting and unauthorized excavations, driven by a desire for ancient artifacts, also pose a threat, as they disrupt archaeological contexts and damage the integrity of the site. It's a constant battle between modern development and the silent, fragile remnants of the past. The scale of the wall also presents a logistical nightmare for preservation. Protecting 195 kilometers of archaeological site is a vast undertaking, requiring significant funding, trained personnel, and continuous monitoring. This involves archaeological surveying to identify threatened sections, conservation work to stabilize crumbling areas, and legal protection to prevent further encroachment. Establishing buffer zones around the most significant sections and educating local communities about the wall's importance are also crucial steps. A quirky tidbit in preservation is the use of non-invasive techniques, like ground-penetrating radar, to map buried sections without disturbing them, helping conservators decide where to focus their limited resources. Historians and conservationists still argue whether the best approach is to fully excavate and restore certain sections of the wall, making them more visible and accessible, or to prioritize a less intrusive strategy of minimal intervention, focusing on protecting the buried remains from further damage. Whatever the method, the continuous, quiet efforts to protect the red snake are vital, ensuring that this incredible testament to ancient ingenuity remains for future generations to study and ponder. As the sun dips below the horizon, casting long purple shadows across the Gorgan plain, we arrive at the final, persistent enigma of the red snake, its enduring mystery. Despite decades of dedicated archaeological research, the marvel of satellite imagery, and painstaking analysis of every unearthed brick, there remain fascinating, lingering questions about the Great Wall of Gorgan, unresolved puzzles that continue to intrigue historians and archaeologists alike. You see, even when a story seems complete, there are always faint echoes, unanswered whispers from the past. One of the most significant, lingering questions, despite the radiocarbon and OSL dating efforts, is the precise, definitive construction timeline for the entire length of the wall. Was it truly a single, unified project built continuously over a specific period? Or were there significant breaks, periods of abandonment, and while current evidence points to a Sassanian origin in the 5th or 6th century CE, some scholars still debate the possibility of earlier Parthian-era sections being incorporated, or later repairs that might obscure the original chronology. It's like trying to date a very, very old family heirloom that has been passed down through generations, each one adding their own subtle marks or repairs, pinpointing the exact start and end dates with absolute certainty. Given the sheer length and the fact that it was built piece by painstaking piece, remains a complex challenge. Another intriguing mystery revolves around the exact composition and size of the labor force at different stages. While we've discussed the likely involvement of soldiers and conscripts, the specific numbers, the organization of their work shifts, and whether there was a consistent system across the entire 195 kilometers remain elusive. How did the Sasanian state manage to feed, house, and motivate so many people for so long across such a vast and often remote frontier? The logistics, though impressive, still hold many secrets. And what about the skilled engineers and architects? Were they a few key individuals whose knowledge was passed down, or a larger, more formalized class of imperial specialists? Then there's the question of its ultimate effectiveness and final demise. While the Arab-Islamic conquests are often cited as the reason for its abandonment, how long was the wall actively maintained and garrisoned in the immediate aftermath of those momentous events? Did it simply fall into disuse due to a lack of resources and changing priorities, or was there a more direct, swift abandonment? The archaeological record, while rich, often provides snapshots rather than a continuous narrative, leaving room for interpretation. A quirky, perhaps more philosophical mystery is the lack of detailed written records. As we mentioned, for such a monumental achievement, its relative silence in Sassanian chronicles and other contemporary texts remains peculiar. Was it simply too mundane for the chroniclers of kings and battles, or were the records simply lost to time? Historians still argue whether the wall's location, running largely through flat terrain, was an engineering choice born of necessity due to the lack of natural barriers, or if it was a deliberate strategic decision to force invaders into a predictable approach where they could be more easily engaged. Whatever the answers, these lingering questions ensure that the red snake will continue to whisper its silent, ancient secrets, inviting future generations to explore and unravel the enduring mystery of its slow, powerful rise and gentle decline. As the sun finally sets and the last traces of daylight fade from the sky, imagine the Gorgan plain now bathed in the soft, silvery glow of the moon. The red snake, a silent, gentle undulation in the landscape. Our journey through its slow construction, its ancient life, and its enduring mysteries now draws to a close, allowing you to settle deeper into your pillow, your mind perhaps filled with images of ancient bricklayers, watchful sentinels, and the quiet flow of unseen water. Feel the gentle hum of peace descending, a quiet stillness that wraps around you as the weight of history lifts from your thoughts. The Great Wall, once a symbol of vigilance and defense, now stands as a gentle reminder of human ingenuity, persistence, and the quiet passage of time. Let your breath deepen, softening with each slow, steady exhale. The distant sounds of the ancient world, the rhythmic thud of bricks being laid, the faint jingle of camel bells on ancient supply routes, the hushed whispers of soldiers on watch, now dissolve, fading into the soft background hum of your own quiet space. There's no rush now, no need to hold onto any particular detail. Just allow the impressions to wash over you like gentle waves on a distant shore. The vast plains, the towering forts, the ingenious water systems, they are all becoming part of a peaceful tapestry in your mind, a story told so slowly that its sole purpose is to invite calm. Feel your body relaxing, melting into the softness beneath you, as if you too are slowly becoming one with the ancient earth, warm and still. The red snake has completed its silent vigil, and now it invites you to join it in a profound, restful quiet. Allow your thoughts to grow soft and indistinct, like the edges of a dream. Drift away now, knowing that some stories are best told slowly, in the darkness, just before sleep. Good night and sweet dreams.